Hello, everyone, and welcome to Holocaust Education in Times of Uncertainty. I'm Dr. Shay Pilnik. I'm the founding director of the Emil and Jenny Fish Holocaust and Genocide Studies Center at Yeshiva University. This is a series in which we try to map the landscape of Holocaust education around the United States and speak to Holocaust education leaders in the field. We have a very exciting guest in our program today. I also wanted to thank the 620 people who watched so far my conversation with Dr. Darren Hamschild from Hurricane Milwaukee. The series will continue. We have a couple more speakers. This series is the first program ever of the Fish Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. We are now promoting MA and a certificate for teachers that is under development. We already have 2 courses offered in the fall. Please feel free to spread the word, learn more about the program. You can see actually in the window my email address, shay.pilnik@yu.edu. Feel free to contact me with questions. One of the courses, by the way, is taught by Dr. Josh Zimmerman, author of The Polish Underground and the Jews, and a world-acclaimed scholar. This is going to be fascinating and interesting, and we have everything set instead, with one exception, you. We're looking for students. So please feel free to contact us. So today we are here to present a colleague and a friend who has been a leader of, I would say, the primary Holocaust Education Institute in the Midwest and one of the leading institutes in the country, Vice President of Education and Exhibitions at the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. Kelley Szany, welcome to our program.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
So Kelley, like every other Holocaust education leader, it starts with a journey. Every journey is different. So I'm curious, first of all, and I'm sure that our viewers who are joining us now are curious as well, if you can describe what your journey has been.
So my journey's been a long one for sure, and definitely not typical. So I grew up in upstate New York, in Syracuse, New York, in a very strict Irish Catholic home. But I grew up in a home in which my parents really taught my siblings and I, particularly the power of the word hate and what that meant, and that we had to cherish and understand people's differences. And I had always really been a huge history buff, particularly World War II. And when I got into undergraduate at Canisius College in Buffalo, New York, took a Holocaust course and really became interested in the fact the history was important to me, but more so, how was it possible that essentially an entire Western world remained indifferent to the atrocities that were being committed? And it was really from there that I found all my research, all my focus being on studying the history of the Holocaust. That I eventually found a way to marry with my love of museums. I was always a huge museum geek as a kid and was able to discover the public history program at Loyola University of Chicago. And public history is really the accessibility of history. How can we take not just the dates and facts, but the story, the people, the information behind history, which I think it makes so personal and connects to our daily lives through exhibits, through oral histories, archives, documentaries, etc. And really focused on the role that Holocaust museums and memorials have as we move further away in time from this history, what role we serve and purpose we serve. And then through my graduate work, I had to intern. And so I interned at then our parent organization, the Holocaust Memorial Foundation in Skokie, Illinois. Just celebrated my 18th anniversary as an employee with the museum. Thank you. And just have loved every moment. I literally have done nothing else, and I just love it. I love it. I never want to leave.
You are active in the field of Holocaust, not only museology, but also Holocaust education at large. You are a board member of the Association of Holocaust Organizations. You're actually a pretty well-known figure in the world of Holocaust education. So, Kelley, yesterday we spoke to, not yesterday, the other day, we spoke to Dan, who leads the quintessential research in Holocaust education institution that comes to the classroom where activities don't happen in the actual building, but rather in partnership with other organizations. Your organization has a different structure and mission. You have a museum, a large museum, visited by, if I remember, dozens of thousands of students throughout the year. So tell me a little bit about what's special about Holocaust education in a museum setting.
So I think in the museum setting, what Illinois Holocaust Museum is able to do, so we're the third largest museum in the country. We have over 70,000 students and educators who visit us on an annual basis, nearly 200,000 general visitors. And I think what we're able to do in a museum setting is to bring an intimacy and kind of an immersive journey to the history of the Holocaust alive for our visitors through the objects and stories in particular. Those are things that you're not going to be able to get in a classroom setting that really allow the history to become one that I think can better connect with our visitors. You will find when you visit Illinois Holocaust Museum that our exhibits are very interactive, very immersive, and you're not going to find an encyclopedia on the wall. We want our objects and the stories of our local survivors, particularly those from the Chicagoland area, to speak and bring that history to life.
Do you feel that the one-day visit of students, I can share my own reflection. The Illinois Holocaust Museum added another dimension to our program, to our organization back in Milwaukee, where we created a day trip where students from, I remember one Catholic school in Waukesha spent a whole day. The experience was transformative, but to what degree do you fear that maybe they're going to be feeling and thinking that, that's it. Now we're good. Now we will make sure that never again actually happens just because of one day trip. How does that dynamic play itself out?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think that the one day trip is a step in the right direction, but definitely shouldn't be the only thing. What we encourage our educators to do in particular when they leave the museum is to continue to have conversations and really unpack, I think, particularly emotionally, what the students are feeling and how they think that they can connect the history and lessons and stories that they've learned to today. We know that students, are spending 3 to 4 hours at our museum, sometimes, the full day, as you mentioned, and we know that they're only going to remember an nth of what that is. And so we're always telling our docents, is it more important for a school to remember what year Hitler came to power, however important that is, or is it more important for them to remember the power of them to be upstanders versus bystanders, to speak out against hatred and prejudice when they see it? Is it more important for them to remember the story of Sephora Katz or Aaron Elster or Sam Harris? I think those are the things that we want our visitors to take. So we're hoping that a visit to the museum is the first step. We hope that people come back because we have, a wide array and a diversity of exhibitions, including our special exhibits, which not only go into a deep dive of the Holocaust, but often are talking about broader social justice and human rights issues. So I think it's definitely a first step in education, but many more steps are needed.
So you mentioned the significance of survivor stories. Does that, I'm just curious, have anything to do with the fact that Skokie, Illinois has been a survivor community and that survivors propelled the foundation of the museum? Is that something unique for the Illinois Holocaust Museum?
So I think
focused on survivor stories?
Yeah, so I think that any good, sound Holocaust history, I think, is grounded in the stories of Holocaust survivors. But what is unique about our museum, as you mentioned, is we're in Skokie specifically. Skokie in the 1970s had one of the largest Holocaust survivor populations in the world. About 7,000 survivors of the Holocaust lived there. Still today, around 5,000 survivors of the Holocaust live in the Chicagoland area, many of them from the former Soviet occupied territories. But it's our way of, through the objects and stories of local local survivors, to have our visitors understand these are your neighbors, these are members of your community. And for our students to remember, they're not the gray-haired people you're seeing on our TVs. They were teenagers. They were age, your age during this period of time. So I think any good museum, and most Holocaust museums are grounding it in survivor stories.
So I would say that from what I know, what's in the very infrastructure of the Illinois Holocaust Museum is a mandate, a piece of legislation that calls schools to teach the subject, which is integrated into your field trips. You are reaching out to communities, to schools in rural areas and also in the inner city. You have a fascinating program also for the training of police officers. So we wanted to talk about mandate today. I know that you picked a quite thought-provoking and provocative title. Do we need another mandate? Which is a good question. Do we? The present and future of Holocaust education in the US. So could you, Kelley, just tell our viewers who are not familiar with the subject of mandates, what exactly they are and what's the purpose that they mean to achieve?
Mm-hmm. So typically, mandates so Illinois was the first state in the entire country to mandate the study of the Holocaust. Other states have since followed: California, most recently in the past couple of weeks, New Hampshire, and right now well over nearly almost 30 states have mandates to study. Others have gubernatorial commissions and councils as well that look to provide guidelines for Holocaust education. And then in 2005, Illinois Holocaust Museum worked to expand the mandate to include other historical and contemporary genocides. And I picked the question in particular because what I'm continuing to see over particularly the past couple of years with the increasing rise of anti-Semitism and hate within the United States and really globally across the world is that many people feel that mandating Holocaust education is kind of the panacea or the solution to legislate away hate, legislate away anti-Semitism. And we certainly know that it just isn't that simple.
If I can make
Yeah.
an editorial comment, there's about
Please.
15 states that either have a mandate or some in the pipeline. New Hampshire just joined. I worked with a team. This was a volunteer propelled effort, a team in Milwaukee that were working on the Holocaust education mandate in Wisconsin that I believe will be in place hopefully within a few months.
Yes.
So we see a trend that more and more states in the union are going in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
What you mentioned the fact that it's not a panacea. What's your take on the process? What are the main challenges that you see? What are the main flaws? Perhaps is there a problem with our expectations?
Yeah, no, all good questions. So I think oftentimes mandates are created with no input from the actual educators who are going to be asked to implement the mandate. I know Seattle right now is, working towards a mandate, but is doing, something in which they're using the input from educators to work through that. And I think that that's important. I also think that oftentimes we find that mandates tend to be really kind of loose in their language in order to get passed. So for example, for Illinois Holocaust Museum, the mandate in the state of Illinois is K through 12. We know that we're never going to teach the Holocaust to kindergartners. It's just simply, not pedagogically sound and correct. But it also is a mandate that isn't funded, which often is what you find with mandates. There is no...
So some are funded and some are not funded.
Some are funded, some are not. And the ones that are funded tend to be more successful. And then additionally, so oftentimes there's no metrics to the success of the mandate. There's typically no follow-up or evaluation to whether the mandate is successful. And oftentimes mandates don't come with teacher training. So you're prescribing to a teacher that they have to add onto an already full plate of their history. I have one friend who's a history teacher who says, Kelley, I have to teach from Plato to NATO in 1 year. And now you're adding on top of this, the Holocaust. And so what I think our responsibility we as Holocaust museums, commissions, councils, organizations, and individuals, and other organizations that I work with, like Together We Remember, Unsilence, and others, is to provide that training for educators that are going to say, okay, if you're going to teach for 2 to 3 days, 3 to 4 weeks, or a whole semester, that training needs to come along with it, and resources need to come along with it, and oftentimes that isn't the case. So the mandates do bring about some challenges.
So I would say that in terms of conceptually, a mandate is about legislation. Legislators are about mandating, they're about creating laws, ordinances. They're really about laying out behavioral expectations. Education is a totally different story. Education done effectively, and the two of us are educators, so we know that. Education is a dialogue. It's a dialogical process between a teacher and students that involves the community. I'm curious what does it really mean that the teacher complies with a mandate? If you can
Such a good question.
Uh-huh.
But that's one of the $1 million questions when it comes to a mandate, because right now, again, using the example of the mandate in the state of Illinois, there is no prescription. So a teacher can literally stand in front of their class, say between 1933 and 1945, there was, this really terrible group of people called the Nazis and collaborators, and they killed 6 million Jews and millions of others, and it was called the Holocaust, the end. And check the box. They fulfilled the mandate.
Did they?
So yeah, so this is obviously really problematic. And then additionally, we're finding teachers, because of either lack of resources or lack of training, are engaging in simulation, calling us and wanting the dimensions of our rail car, because we know what they want to do. They want to put a masking tape cut out in front of their room in the shape of a rail car, put all their kids in it, and say, okay, now you know what it was like to be deported to a camp. To create this simulation, because they feel like that's the best way that I'm going to be able to get to my students. And you and I both know that simply is not the best way. But those are the mistakes or misguidance that teachers often have, because they're trying to catch up quickly, to teach a topic that is incredibly daunting, incredibly complex, and sometimes, make these pitfalls.
Maybe even the most complex one in the humanities that they would encounter. In other words, there's an expectation laid out in the mandate that now they are required to fulfill.
Correct.
A certain segment, curricular segment, without necessarily providing them with the tools to not only to teach, but also to understand the subject. Don't you feel sometimes that it's almost like telling a math teacher, actually an English teacher who knows nothing about math, to teach graduate level math at a university?
That's so true. Such a good point. Absolutely.
So now I would like to be a devil's advocate and ask you, let's imagine the newly created state, that's the 51st state in the Union, the state of South Antarctica, that just joined the Union. I know that you haven't heard about it yet. And they are considering, they see that all the other 50 states have mandates on Holocaust education, including the federal Never Again Act. And they still have the freedom to decide to design a mandate, yes or no. What would preclude them from maybe saying, you know what, this is not effective, this doesn't work, let's just forget about it? So in what way do we see advantages for the mandate?
So I think that when a mandate is created and then guided through either commissions or councils or museums and organizations that can create a structure or framework for providing sound resources, sound teaching materials, we are not at a lack of incredible resources that are out there, from Echoes and Reflections to Yad Vashem to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York has incredible curriculum. So we all have curriculum that can be provided. It's being able to marry what's out there with then the kind of will of administrators, superintendents, teachers to support the legislation, or to support a mandate. And I also think that there's a misconception that, oh, well, we don't need to study the Holocaust because it's ancient history, it's 75 years ago, and well, my population mostly isn't Jewish, so it doesn't really connect with them. And I think that we need to address that misconception. The Holocaust, yes, affected the large proportion of the Jewish community, but it is a human history. It is a collective history that we can all learn and should learn its history and lessons. And that so much about the history of the Holocaust could be used, or looking through the lens of the history of the Holocaust when we look at what happened in Europe after the Cold War, what subsequently happens in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, today in Syria. There are so many lessons that a district can use and connect it back to the Holocaust. Even the idea of how to civically engage their students and to empower them to be more active on a political level or community level. I just think there's so many cross-discipline lessons that us as organizations, as educators, could sell South Antarctica High School on why a mandate could be important if you implement certain thresholds within it and give it some teeth with resources and training.
So you enunciate your own opinions, but I have to say I fully agree with you. We can maybe summarize that we both think that the mandate is the right course of action.
Yeah.
That it is added value. Do you see maybe in a mandate some promotional value, the fact that now teachers in a rural setting, let's say, or even in an urban setting, realize that, hey, there is a mandate, meaning the government, society, the community, believe that this is a subject of paramount importance, and maybe I should learn about it and should teach. Promotional in the sense that we're not really trying to be coercive and to send teachers to prison or parents to prison if the teaching doesn't happen.
Yeah, and I think that the challenge with Holocaust education in the United States, all these recent Pew studies, ADL studies, the Claims Conference did a study a couple of years ago about, people's lack of understanding about what Auschwitz is or what the Holocaust is or who was killed during the Holocaust or, where these sites are. I think that speaks to how much further we have to go as a country when it comes to Holocaust education, and the role that, again, resources and training and mandates can play in that.
Perhaps they also allude to the fact that a mandate without all these resources, just a mandate, leads to the same kind of ignorance that we're trying to combat. So
Exactly. And it can't, one of the things I always say, and we also can't, like I said, legislate away hate, and having a Holocaust mandate is important, but it also has to go hand in hand with anti-bias education, education about the role of human behavior, what it takes to have someone not only be an upstander and choose to intervene, but also, the complexity of human behavior about how and why one chooses to be a perpetrator, a collaborator, a bystander. Why does one choose to intervene or not, or to become involved, or looking at stereotypes and prejudice and indifference. I think, again, there's so many lessons we can learn from the Holocaust, but also, again, hand in hand with that has to be education for our students, for our educators, for parents and others that look at their own implicit and unconscious bias and how that applies today. I think that's an important part that has to be added to Holocaust education in the United States.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to encourage, in the meantime, our viewers, those who are joining us right now. I know the majority of the viewers will see the recording of this session on our Facebook page. If you would like to address questions to Kelley, please feel free to do so. We have a short Q&A section at the end. Kelley, I wanted to ask you, how in your mind can the Fish Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at YU be a resource, be of help to a museum like IMEC, like the museum that you are the vice president of?
So I think that's such a great question. And I think what we can continue to do is that, I think the master's program that you have is really important. We as an institution over the years have seen a lot of turnover from educators. We've seen a lot of new educators come in. So being able, I think, to train individuals, educators to then who can eventually go out and kind of train the trainers, if you will, out in the communities is such a huge help, even for institutions like ours, who cover a lot of the Midwest. We're still a small but mighty staff, and we need help. There's a lot of work to do. So I think, the program that you have developed and Yeshiva has developed is so important. And I think additionally, so, we as an institution, are continuing to look at how we can expand our reach and impact, not only in the non-Jewish community, but Jewish community as well. And we can always be doing more work. And partnerships is really a part of the DNA of the museum. And again, like I said, there's so much work to do. And I think anytime you have the opportunity to connect yourself with such a high profile university and the work that you do, advances it even more and is important.
That's great to know, and we will definitely be in touch. So as we are approaching the end of our program, I wanted to also give you the stage to share the most inspiring, uplifting, incredible experience you had as a Holocaust educator, and also most challenging, difficult, maybe frustrating. And I'm sure there's plenty on both sides.
Oh, wow. Well, I would probably say, let's start with the most challenging. I think the most challenging for me is, to be very candid, the overwhelmingness sometimes of the nature of the work that we do. It's very easy to feel, in the balance of trying to do the everyday work of the museum, that we aren't doing enough, or that, you personally as a professional aren't doing enough to make a difference. And it can become very kind of almost paralyzing. And, that you want to kind of comment and intervene, on anything and everything that's happening in the world. And we know that it's simply not possible, and you almost get this compassion fatigue a little bit. So sometimes I feel, like inadequate, that we're not doing enough, but I know we're doing everything we can. But I think that often is frustrating to me, and frustrating, I think, oftentimes to see an apathy or indifference from people, who I think feel that oftentimes that they have to have an either or decision to care. You can't care about ending genocide or identity-based violence alongside of hunger in your own community. To me, it doesn't have to be an either or thing. You can be passionate and care about both and work towards equity in both. So I think those are some of the challenges. And I think for me, the most remarkable and positive thing about my role and my position is the gift of meeting so many survivors. My life has been truly blessed by them. They have shown me the true meaning of strength and resilience and compassion. And I do the work I do every day because of them and for them, and to honor their legacy. The challenge of the job is that we lose them this week. We lost one of our beloved survivors, Magda Brown. And that never gets easy during this COVID crisis. We've lost 5 of our survivors, and not being able to grieve them like we want to, and should be able to. That's difficult, but they have truly blessed my life, and it's one of the best gifts I personally and professionally as a human being.
Wow.
That's so rewarding for me.
Wow. Kelley, this is a great lead to one of the questions from the audience.
Yeah.
How do you see the COVID crisis impact our ability to deliver programs/training?
So the COVID crisis is, has been difficult for many of us that provide training. But I think what you're seeing with our museum, with many Holocaust museums and organizations, commissions and councils, that we've been able to pivot very successfully to a virtual format like Zoom and others. During this COVID crisis, we were able to offer 8 different professional development trainings. We had 80 to 100 teachers at each of our trainings. You know, they're almost easier to do. You can impact and reach more people. They can do it while sitting in their pajamas in the comfort of home. They don't have to fight Chicago traffic.
I mentioned the 625 views. That's something you normally don't get.
Right. So
when people have to dress up,
you know, it makes you nervous, you know, how it's going to be received. But I think it's actually provided, you know, a wonderful opportunity for us as educators. You know, together, remember this organization I'm on this advisory council with. Recently, during the crisis, they had wanted to host a vigil during Genocide Awareness and Prevention Month. And because of this incredible virtual format, we're able to host a 24-hour Zoom vigil with countries and people literally all across the world because of the power of the internet. And so it's brought some good gifts despite its challenges. I think we're reaching and impacting more people than maybe we would have if it hadn't happened.
Okay, going back to the mandate, an interesting question. Aren't there examples where states have made progress towards the goal of Holocaust and civic education without mandates, like for instance, Nevada, or through the State Department of Education, like for instance, Maryland? So must a mandate take place to get to our goal?
Oh, such a good question.
Yeah.
No, I actually don't think it needs to. I think that if you have, you know, either commissions or councils or not even that, but active people who, you know, are lobbying with the elected officials, with school boards to say that they want it to be part of that school's standards, those state standards, that Holocaust education needs to be a part of it and should be integrated into it. Sometimes it's almost better because you're kind of going like directly into the standards of the school district and incorporating it. So I don't think a mandate is necessary. I think there's other ways to be able to do it and to do it really well.
Okay, Kelley, first of all, thank you for sharing with us your both your brilliance and 18 years of experience. It's fascinating.
Thank you for
There are
having
more
me.
questions coming up.
Yeah.
You texted to me. I don't know if you would want to stay offline, look at the Facebook page and continue to answer them.
Oh,
I'm
sure.
afraid that if we're not done within 40 minutes, we will both turn into pumpkins. So we have to be cognizant of the time. Kelley, I wanted to thank you for a thought-provoking discussion. I learned a lot from you about the mandate. This is a subject that I carefully studied and worked with, and I think that you are a terrific resource.
Oh, thank you.
Our volunteers, when they put together a Holocaust education mandate task force, I know that they contacted you and they spoke to you at length and relied on your expertise. My next guest in the program is going to be my colleague and friend, Dr. Paul Radensky. Paul is the assistant director of the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City.
He's so great.
A living memorial to the Holocaust. Yes, they do great work. They're going to be my neighbors at YU on different sides of Manhattan. He's going to be with us next week on Tuesday, July 14th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So I wanted to thank you, Kelley, one more time, to thank our viewers who joined us for Holocaust education in times of uncertainty. I applaud you again for all the great work that you do, interacting with students, with teachers, with civic leaders, board members, and donors. I know that this is not an easy job, but it's so important. And thank you for also being my colleague and my mentor. Thank you.
It's an honor. Thank you. Thank you.
My honor as well. And we'll be in touch. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and see you next week.